Hi, everyone. This is Marion Owen coming to you live from Kodiak Island, Alaska. Spring is almost here. It's a balmy 29 degrees. So, thanks so much for joining me. And we have three topics to talk about today, and it's spring gardening tips, and we're going to follow with a Q&A. So, thanks again for being here. What we're going to do is go through these three topics, and then I'll turn on the chat. And as a matter of fact, it might be kind of fun if you were to let me know where you are hearing me. So I'll go ahead and turn on the chat, and we can get into the Q&As. And I know some of you have already sent me some questions, so I'm all set. So let's dive in. All right. Here are today's topics. We're going to talk about transplanting seedlings so they don't just survive, but they thrive. Number 2 is how to protect your seedlings after you've transplanted them in the garden. Number 3, how to cope with slugs. Ew. And then number 4, we'll do a Q&A, and we'll go to your questions. So what we'll do is start right in with transplanting your seedlings in the garden so they, like I said, don't just survive, they actually thrive. Now, I'll give you a list of topics here, but don't panic. We're going to talk about these as we go along, and I'll show you some slides as well. And here are 6 things to do to make sure your seedlings really do thrive, because it's more than just putting your seedlings in the ground and calling it good, like one and done. Seedlings just, it's like having a puppy. You can't just get a puppy and then put it in the corner and expect it to do fine on its own. So these are your babies that you've either raised on your own, seedlings that is, you've either raised on your own or you purchased from, your favorite greenhouse. So what we'll do is we'll start right in, and number one thing is you need to prepare your soil in advance. If you're in a hurry, I get it. At the very least, turn in some well-rotted manure, some finished compost. You know your garden better than anybody. And if it means you don't really know what your soil is all about, then this is a good time to take a soil test. Now, many authorities say that taking a soil test is best done in the spring. It's true, but you can take a soil test any time of year. So take a soil test, and then you want to, let's see, so testing your soil and preparing your soil at least, say, 2 to 3 weeks before you plan on transplanting your seedlings outside. Then you want to harden off. So here we go. So the second thing is to harden off your seedlings. Now, this is a very strange term, in my opinion. And if you can come up with another one better than this, have at it. Now, hardening off your seedlings is simply getting them accustomed to the real world, real wind, sun, moisture, and so on. It's a little bit like if I wanted to go to Hawaii in the middle of the winter, which is what many Alaskans do, then it would behoove me to either do a little pre-tanning or be prepared with hats or sunscreen and that kind of thing. So here's a basic way to harden off your seedlings. You take your trays like you see here, and you set them outside, maybe not in direct sun right off the bat, but maybe in a partial, like morning sun, maybe for an hour, maybe 2 max, but out of direct sun. And then bring them back indoors. Next day, bring them back outside again for a longer period. And ideally, you would bring your plants in and out for a week at the very least. Okay, that's what hardening off your seedlings is all about. Then you want to transplant on a cloudy, foggy day, overcast day, or a drizzly day. And the reason why you want to do this, for humans, we think that sunny day, this is awesome. I'm going to go to my favorite greenhouse proprietor, my even a big box store. I'm going to buy a bunch of seedlings. I'm going to put them outside because it's such a beautiful day. You got to think like a plant. Plants don't like to be yanked out of their seed starting container, whatever it was, and then plopped into sunshine because you've disconnected their little hoses. That is that nourishment from those seedling roots from the parent soil. So it's ideal if you can harden them off and then transplant on a cloudy, overcast day. Foggy, slightly rainy is good. If you don't have that option, then either late in the evening if it's too warm, or early in the morning. And in a second, we'll talk about how to protect your seedlings once they're outside. Then what you want to do is slip your seedlings out of the container. And this is how you do it. So here are some tomatoes, for example. These are tomato seedlings, an heirloom Czech tomato seedling that I start every year from seed. You just want to just use your fingers down here and just press on the bottom of the container and lift it out. All right. This is also, this is a tip you want to keep in mind when you're shopping at a nursery or garden center and you want to make sure that the seedlings you're going to purchase are healthy and happy. This is what you need to do is same thing, is to simply take the container, the 4-pack, the 6-pack, or the 4-inch pot, and just tilt it on its side gently, pinch from the bottom a little bit, and slip it out. If the seedling has just a few roots like this, that's great. It's healthy, it's vibrant, the soil should be damp. But if it's all looking like roots and spiraled around in the container, then you can bet that your plant is stressed in some way. And this is important because, not everybody waters the garden centers at the right time. And so they might have just run around with a watering hose and it looks good and moist from the top. But if, say, plants like Chinese cabbage, kale, broccoli, and so on, if they're really stressed and you take these plants home, you put them in the ground and then they just bolt, they just set up that flower shoot and just say, I'm done, not doing this, then you don't get a head of broccoli, you just get the flower stalk going up. So it's not necessarily something you did if you're purchasing these plants. So, all right, so you slip the seedlings out of the container. You want to take plenty of soil with it, as much as you can with the roots. Then you want to water it well in place and protect your seedlings. We'll talk about that in a minute. So here's another trick. Plants like lettuce, for example, they don't particularly like it if you press down around the plant, around the seedling to push it into the ground. Not so much. Your brassicas, for example, your cabbage and kale and Brussels sprouts, yes, absolutely. They just love it when you just kind of go and press them down on the soil. It's a good thing. One more thing I want to show you is when you're transplanting your seedlings outside, it really makes a difference how deep you set your seedlings. And I'll show you in a second here. These are kale seedlings that volunteered to be on this program, right? Say hi to Kale. By the way, kale's been all the buzz for a long time, but you know what? What's even better than kale, recently discovered, is cress. So kale has been knocked off the top here. So anyway, so this is a kale seedling, right? And then you want to push or plant your kale seedling to here, just at the base. You don't want one long leggy stem poking out. You want to get it all the way up to the seed starting leaf right there, or even up to the true leaf, which is the one that shows you, hey, I'm a kale plant, or hey, I'm a Brussels sprout, okay? This is a pretty good healthy seedling because you can see there's a good set of white roots, not brown or gray, which would show rot problems. Let me put this guy away. Now for a tomato seedling, it's a similar situation. So here are the first seedling, like seed starting leaf right here, but you can bury a tomato all the way up to its neck, like this. You can even lay it on its side and have a little bit poking up. It behooves you to even do that in a container as deep as possible, just so the little bit on the top pokes up. Now, on the other hand, if you're transplanting lettuce, you don't want to plant it too deep. Otherwise, you get crown rot. And one day the seedling looks great, and the next day, the whole thing pops off. So it's just rotted. All right, so let's get to our next topic, which is how to protect your seedlings once they're in the ground. And this is a biggie, no matter where you live. I'll show you some of the tips that I use here in a cool climate, and then you can kind of apply them to your situation, be it hot, cool, or warm. So to protect your seedlings, and we'll go through these, first of all, it seems logical, I know, but you need to keep them moist. If you have a breezy day, it'll just suck that moisture right out. And then you want to install physical barriers. I'll talk about that. Now, this is for dogs, cats, birds, frost, like weather, rabbits, squirrels, deer, wind, sun, hail, you name it. Okay. So we'll show you a case in point. For physical barriers, here is a slide of one of our raised beds. And there's a lot of things going on here. First, on the right, we have tulle fabric. I'll show you in a second. We have fishnet over the whole thing. And we have the milk cartons in the middle, protecting some seedlings. And then, like I said, the whole thing is covered with fishnet. Now, you might be wondering, well, what about those white hoops? We actually keep these white hoops in place year round. And I have a video about that, and I can share that link with you. So we keep these hoops up year round, and we cover them with different materials. For example, during the winter, we might cover it with a reinforced plastic. These are like nylon stripping within the plastic. And then what we do is secure it with these paper clips and that lath strip, which is that piece of wood, to hold it down during winter. Now, then in the summertime or spring, we take off that heavy duty plastic and we replace it with a variety of materials. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So and it's really common, and I've been gardening for 35 years, and milk cartons like this were fairly new, but I figured out a way to put them to use. And what I did, and this is pretty common, you know about this, is you just cut out the bottom, right? You want to cut out the bottom, and I don't bother keeping the lid on. What I do is, you see this part, the top of the handle, and what I've done is I will take a piece of like heavy duty wire, and you can do this with like a coat hanger or something, and then I bring it down like this so that there's quite a bit hanging out the bottom. And what I do is it sits on the soil like that, and then on a particularly sunny day, I actually will lift it up and rotate it and expose the seedling, say right here. And what this does is, because this is translucent, it keeps the soil cooler around the seedling, which is something you might want if you live in a warmer climate. For me, in a cooler climate, I like to lift this up and the sun can warm the soil around the seedling. If it's raining, great, then it can just still come through the hole right here. So that's why you see these lined up in kind of a row, and you can just lift it up and that milk carton, rotate it and set it down next to the plant, next to the seedling, and that wire keeps it fully secured. And then the other fabric I use, this is tulle fabric, which a lot of you might recognize as the wedding fabric, you know, or the tutu fabric. And I buy bolts of this, and I secure this, stretch it over the raised beds, like you saw here on the right-hand side, and I secure it down really strongly. And the reason I use this tulle fabric is because of root maggots, which start, the cycle is the root maggot starts as a fly. It's looks kind of like a smaller house fly, which lands at the base of the plant and then lays an egg, which then hatches into the larva, which is the eating machine that chews into your roots and causes problems. So what you want to do is interrupt the cycle. And this is nice and stretchy. It's inexpensive, and you can get it on Amazon or fabric stores. And I like white, but hey, you can use pink or blue or whatever. And then what I use is to secure it down really well. And these are one of my favorite tools in the garden are these binder clips, these 2-inch wide binder clips, and they fit right over those. I think it's 3/4 inch PVC or whatever you have going. And I just secure it really tight because you don't want those little flies to get in there. And it could be carrot fly, it could be any kind of pest. And the water comes through, the air circulates fine. It's great. And then I use a netting of some sort, and that's to keep out the the birds and the rabbits and the neighbor's dog and cats. So let me just say something about dogs. If it's your dog and your dog keeps getting into your raised beds and your gardens, well, I'll just tell you, it's not the dog's fault. So something can be done about that, whether it's training, a fence, something. If it's your neighbor's dog, you might look into what local regulations you have, but talk to your neighbor. Same with the cat. So I've had to get live traps because we have sometimes feral cats. We do have bears. It's Alaska, right? But anyway, this webbing is I think it opens up to about 3/4 inch or maybe a full inch. This is what you call shrimp web. This is a commercial web that back in the shrimping days was very popular, and I just use it over and over again. So when you secure it, I'll show you again. When you drape it over a raised bed like this, you don't necessarily need to secure it down, but it just drapes over and it keeps out birds and so on. It's great. So that's what I have for the kind of materials that I use. And I find that protects the seedlings great. Now, you can also use this if you're planting carrot seeds and you're tired of cats or birds scratching up all your seeds and making a mess. Peas, the same thing. So I find that when the pea starts to germinate and those little seedlings poke up, it is fun for the magpies and the other birds to just pull those out like they're beach balls or something. Yeah. All right. Let's go to. Let me show you a close up here again to show those 2-inch binder clips in place. And this kind of plastic you can get at hardware stores. And it'll last. Some of ours have been 10 years old. Even though it might get holes in it, that nylon webbing or reinforced material inside keeps it from just peeling apart. And we keep this plastic on all winter. So you can imagine what kind of conditions this goes through. The next thing you want to do is watch the weather. And these 3 diagrams kind of give you an idea of what a seedling might go through and the value of these PVC hoops or some sort of structure, be it a giant greenhouse or a mini hoop. And so on the left, you see the mini hoop in place in plastic. and the difference between a protected plant and one that's, of course, getting pelted with rain or hail. The center photo you see here indicates the difference between cold air up above. Cold air sinks, right? And so, given a chance, it's going to sink down and just kind of affect those seedlings as well. It'll be cool inside that little mini hoop, but it'll be much colder outside of it. And then finally, on the right hand side, you see how it's a protection against wind. So know your area, know your lot, um, and help your seedlings accordingly. All right. This is a fun one. Number 3 is how to cope with slugs or snails, whatever you happen to deal with. Now, one thing to keep in mind is slugs are not all bad. I mean, they're part of a hub of our ecosystem. There are wild slugs, and then there are ones that have been introduced. The ones that are introduced don't have natural predators per se, so they'll tend to munch more on what you have to offer in your garden. And I'd like to recommend a fabulous book. This is really great, and it's called The Field Guide to a Slug. This is superb. It's not, I'm not joking. This is no April Fools or anything like that. Field Guide to a Slug. It's a wonderful, wonderful little book. And you'll have a special appreciation for slugs after that. Now, that said, there are a number of ways, and you've probably heard about these as well, to deal with slugs. If you're kind of squeamish, then I like to use, well, first of all, I say the 2 best ways to deal with slugs. The first way is you just got to get out and pick. I have a friend who, for days, picked several hundred slugs a day. She would go out in the morning and she'd go out in the evening and she would pick slugs. And my favorite way to pick slugs is with chopsticks. So if you're a little squeamish, practice your chopsticks. If you get really good at it with your right hand, then go to your left. It's that neuroplasticity thing. But picking slugs is the best way to go. Now, I see lots of people using melons, like half melons, and then, they're turned upside down. They turn into slug hotels. Beer traps of like cottage cheese containers or yogurt containers buried in the ground to the soil surface, and then beer or just yeast and sugar and water is added. The thing is, you don't want to do this in your raised beds. It's better to do that, set those up outside your raised beds. The same thing goes with slug baits like Sluggo. You don't want to sprinkle them around your plants in your beds. Do it outside your beds. Attract them that way. I mean, believe it or not, a slug will travel 40 feet to get to a meal in the evening. So they will travel. They really will. And by the way, slugs are cool in that they can actually carry or lift and move things that are 40 and 50 times their weight. Now, I know I couldn't do that. So that's what you need to do. That's the number one thing, is just go out and pick. My parents would pay us per 10 slugs if we went out and picked slugs for her. And then she would actually hand us a little salt shaker, which I don't recommend. The number 2 way to take care of slugs is with those bands of copper, those copper bands. It is more expensive, and if that is an issue, then maybe just put the copper strip or banding around certain plants that are susceptible to slug damage. One thing to do also is, if you have this copper barrier and you're attaching it to the side of a container, and that's to bend part of it over, so there's kind of a lip that the slug has to deal with. Things like diatomaceous earth or crushed glass, that kind of thing. Hey, a slug can travel on a razor blade. The edge of a razor blade. It's not going to do anything to it. They're amazing creatures. They really are. Now, so that's what I would do. And that's what I just pick them, and I would just add the copper strip. Oftentimes you will see people say, hey, keep your garden clean. If a leaf from your broccoli or your kale plant or that falls on the ground, pick it up. I don't agree because or plant, right, has the bottom leaves are starting to wilt, which is pretty common as the season goes on. Well, if slugs are eating those lower leaves and then you pull off because they're getting holes in them, then what do? They just go up one more tier and they just start chomping on the other leaves. So I will often plant sacrificial plants at the beginning and an end of a row. I happen to know that our slugs in our garden love Napa cabbage or Chinese cabbage, the frilly kind. So I will plant um, one on each end of the row, and I'll just let the slugs have at it. And I can pick them from them if I want, but that kind of leaves them to eating those as opposed to the plants that I really really want to save. So okay, so let's go to um, our Q&A session, and I'm going to turn on the chat just to make sure if you have any questions to put them in there. And I'm going to dive into some questions that people have submitted ahead of time. So I talked about how, okay, oh, yeah, speaking of slugs, hey, how do you get slug slime off your hands? Well, using water doesn't work because slug slime attracts water. As a matter of fact, it is so efficient in doing that. Scientists are now studying slug slime because slugs are able to adhere to brick or the side of a rock for hours on end. Now, if you're a rock climber or something like that, that might be kind of handy. Anyway, so the best way I have found to get slug slime off your hands, yes, you can rub your hands together so it's kind of like rubber cement and it'll, bead up and then you can just kind of flick it off. But what I do is I keep handy a box of Boraxo soap, that dried boratine soap, and I just put some in my hands and I just rub my hands together. Done. It works great. Oh, here's one. I can't seem to grow carrots. What am I doing wrong? That's a really good question because carrots can be pretty darn frustrating and it requires a lot of patience because if you look at the back of these packets, oftentimes they say days to germination, 6 to 21. So that's like a week to 3 weeks. And you can get a little anxious. But the first thing to do um, is plant them or sow them or sprinkle them and then put just a barely like an eighth of an inch to a quarter inch of soil on top. Now, if it's kind of a hassle to sprinkle out those tiny little seeds, one thing that I've totally fallen in love with are these seed tapes. And a lot more companies are coming out with these seed tapes. God bless them. And they're evenly spaced because some people, they just don't like to thin them out, for example. But it's important, religiously important, to keep your carrot seeds evenly moist. That might mean going out there with a watering can 3 times a day. If you have to do that, then that's what requires to be done. So I will have a watering can ready to go, a sprinkler hose, whatever it takes, to sprinkle water on those seedlings all the time. Now, here's a trick that my sister-in-law uses when she's in interior Alaska, and she sprinkles out her carrot seeds, and then right away she'll water them, and right away she'll put a piece of carpet on top. So it's not such a hassle to water it all the time. She just checks it about every few days, and then when they start to, she just lifts off the carpet, and it does wonders. It's really cool. It's really great. So that's what you need to do is keep them well watered. Don't cover them too deeply. Make sure that your seeds are fresh. I always buy, that's one thing that to keep my stress level down and then are these guys going to germinate is I will buy fresh seeds every year. All right. Oh, What's your favorite gardening tool? I have three actually. My favorite all-purpose gardening tool is the Cobra head right here for weeding, scraping. It's I love it. I love it. I even use it to make little holes for seedlings to go in. My other favorite gardening tool are a good pair of gloves, right? And here's one that you probably haven't heard of. At the peak of the gardening season, I use this. I have around my neck a 10x jeweler's loop or geologist loop, and you use it by bringing it up to your nose about that width, and then you come up to your plant like this, right? You come up to your plant and you have to get about that close. Let me tell you, when people come to me, like I said, I've been gardening 35 years. I meet them in the grocery store and they say, I really want to be able to grow XYZ, but I just get these aphid infestations. Well, aphid infestations don't happen overnight. They start with one aphid. So your job as a gardener is to run a trap line, as in you. Go around your garden once or twice a day, take your coffee in the morning and go check it out, and take your little 10x loop with you. Actually, you find some really cool things like look inside flowers and stuff, but this is my best defensive tool for keeping track of pests in general. So get yourself a 10x loop or maybe 3 or 4, hang them in your greenhouse, in your potting shed, hang them around your neck, whatever it takes, but you'll just love this. It opens up a whole new world for you anyway. All right, how do you grow potatoes in a container? This is really popular, becoming more popular as people are, moving into condos, maybe just a deck, or they're downsizing. And for me, I'm 67, so in some ways I am downsizing, but I love my spuds. So let's pretend that this is your big container, right? This is your big container. And I learned this from a friend of mine who was an attorney. God bless him. And if this is your giant container, then one thing to do is you fill it up about that far with regular potting soil, right? And then on top of that soil, you put cut potatoes, or my favorite thing, and this is what I do every year, is I will save these little guys. The the experimental farm and the potato scientists in interior Alaska, because potatoes are pretty popular, is they call these drop-ins. And I find these are much more reliable as far as sprouting without having to cut big potatoes. And I get a much better yield and harvest by using these drop-ins. So if your container is maybe 3 feet across at the base, I might put, say, 7 of these drop-ins in there. And having them pre-sprout like this is called chitting, chitting. It's okay to pre-sprout. It's actually preferred to chit your potatoes. Even if your potatoes might have 6 inches long of a stem, right? Then go ahead and use them just carefully. And potatoes are not so much a root crop, it's a stem crop. So that's why you want to put them on the very bottom, soil like this, and then cover them. You can cover them all the way up at once and mound it over with materials like shredded leaves, straw. You can blend these up. We have kelp here, so you can use kelp. Not a whole lot of high nitrogen or organic material like compost and so on. You don't want to sweeten your soil, but you want to give them enough loft where they can just grow right through your material. Now, for a while, I tried putting potatoes here, just enough soil cover, and then if it would, after it would grow up a little bit, the plant would pop through, then I put more on and more on, and that got to be a hassle because I never got it quite around to all those new shoots coming up. So now I just put the potatoes on top of the soil, and I cover it up, I heap it like an ice cream cone, and it works great. It'll settle, then you just top it off. Now, another thing you can do is a cage, like a wire cage, similar thing. Plant the potatoes and then cover it up, and then the potatoes can kind of poke out the greens this way, but it still grows up the stem. Okay. What causes scab on potatoes? It's generally because your soil is too sweet. The scab, what causes scab, is in every soil. But if it has the right kind of conditions, it tends to blossom and it becomes a problem. If you have a problem with scab, have your soil tested, and part of that test is going to be your pH. Potatoes, more, I should say, the lower the pH in your soil, the less problem you'll have with scab. You don't want to go too low then. pH is a wonderful indicator of what your soil can hold as far as nutrients and have available to your plants. So if you have extremes, like too low a pH or too high a pH, you can have all the nutrients in your soil, but they're going to be locked up and not available to your plants. So don't go on the extreme with too low a pH, but have your soil tested. Oh, here's one. Why are my seedlings all leggy and falling over? So let's talk about this. On the left, we have seedlings that were grown, started the same time. These are black seeded Simpson lettuce seedlings. And on the left, they are grown in a windowsill. You can see how elongated they are. And on the right, these are grown under fluorescent shop lights. And the shop lights are kept 4 inches above the tops of the seedlings. They were planted at the same time. And I wanted to show that to you because time and time again, people will send me pictures. They'll say, why are my seedlings leggy and falling over? And the problem is they're not getting enough light. It's like a teenager. A teenager is in and out of that refrigerator beyond belief. And that's because they are actively growing. And a seedling, same kind of thing. Actively growing, light is energy, so they can make food. Here's another tip is if your seedling tends to be a little yellow, plants need food sooner than you realize. Soil science these days is showing us that it's imperative that even when you plant the seed, that soil needs to be nutrient rich, not over the top. The belief was, oh, a seed doesn't need food because it's all contained within the seed coat. That's not necessarily true. I won't get into that this time around, but just trust me that from the beginning to transplanting outside, your seedling needs nutrition. Now, one of my favorite ways to feed seedlings is I add a variety of materials to that potting mix, and it does not have to be sterile, by the way, is dried kelp or shredded kelp, leaf mold, oh, and I grow comfrey, and I'll dry it. I'll hang it and dry it, and then I'll pulverize it in a used Cuisinart, and I add that powder to the soil as well. For a liquid fertilizer, urine. It's true. It's like forgotten these days. Urine is one of the best, I should say nitrogen rich, but also other minerals. So we actually have little yogurt containers at the back of our toilet downstairs here, and I instruct my husband. But the ratio you want to use is about, for seedlings, is about, if you had a quart of water, maybe just a few tablespoons. And then as they grow, then you can increase that to maybe 1 part to 10. So there you go, bragging rights. All right. So light, that's usually the problem with leggy seedlings and falling over. If you're growing seedlings in a window, If you have enough day length, great. If you don't, like you're starting like in late winter or something, then you want to have some sort of reflective material to bounce the light back onto the seedlings. Okay, it can be foil, it can be space blanket material, whiteboard, whatever it takes, and then to turn them. I turn mine every day. Okay, here's one. Um, what is the best size for raised beds? Raised beds, there's just so many you can buy pre-made these days. If you make your own raised beds out of wood and so on, 12 inches deep, by the way, is like a minimum. But for width, I'm 5'3", so for me, a bed that is 4 feet wide allows me to reach into the center without having to walk on the raised bed. And that's the key, is you don't want to walk on your raised bed if you can possibly help it. If if you're a household of giants, then maybe 5 feet would work. If you're putting your raised bed up against a wall or a building or on the edge of your greenhouse and so on, then 3 feet or even 2.5 feet might be max. So you can reach over without hurting your back. Okay. Now for rhubarb lovers, here you go. My rhubarb stalks are skinny and tough. What can I do? If you're growing rhubarb and it was just thriving for the longest time and now they're just kind of skinny and they're kind of stringy and they're kind of tough, well, they need more water. That might be one of the problems. And mulch, rhubarb will just take whatever you throw at it. However, if it's becoming too compact, the crowns, so to speak, then it's time to divide them. And you just do that with a shovel. You go right down the middle, you divide them, and you plant them about 3 feet apart or so. My husband remembers as a child, he helped his father and a neighbor actually lift with a forklift in the um, in the late season, like when it's done, they would lift them out and they would truck them into a greenhouse and then keep them there over the winter and then transplant them later, and they would get a head start on the harvest. But my husband remembers these rhubarb roots were like 3 and 4 feet long. So if your roots are really compact, it's going to restrict the growth, and it's just asking for space. Like, who likes tight shoes, right? Oh, and we covered this one. How can you tell if store-bought seedlings are healthy? Like I said, you slip it out of the container, you check the roots. If they're white, that's a good sign. If they're gray or brown or kind of tan, that shows a sign of rot, like too much watering. And then if they're all spiraled like this, then I would go to the next set. So, okay. So open up the chat here, and what crops need to be covered with a tulle fabric to protect from the root maggot fly? That would be mostly your cole or brassica crops. So it's a big family: cauliflower, kale, your cabbage, your Brussels sprouts, even your Chinese cabbages and so on. Anything in that family is what I protect from the root maggots. And that includes your turnips and radishes. So I like holy things, but I don't want holy roots. So if I'm doing parsnips, rutabagas, turnips, I cover them as well. So that's a good one. Okay. Could I ask you a question about gardening and health? Yes. I just had a conversation with our local Coast Guard. We have the largest Coast Guard base in the United States here in Kodiak, and they want to move the community gardens, but there was some discussion about the value of them and so on. And I said, hey, it's one of the most, not only is gardening one of the most popular outdoor activities there is, but it's also the most healthy and healing for people of all ages. For kids to see how plants are grown, is a given. To just have your hands in the soil is a blessing. To just be around green growing things. When I was growing up in Washington State, it was near Western State Hospital. It was a mental institution. And in the early 1900s to mid 1900s, there were fruit orchards and gardens, and the patients would go out there and work. It was just so healing. I mean, even if you have gardens or green growing things outside of a hospital window, studies have shown that patients need fewer drugs and pills and capsules. The stress level comes down. So you can just totally relate to this. Even today, I had some concerns about something, and first thing I did in the morning, I just went out in the garden and I just putzed. Even though it was below freezing, I still had things to do. So I can't, I should say I can't express enough. It's just a given, and a very healing part of my life is to be around green growing things. So, all right. Let me get to this part here. And I want to thank you so much for being here with me. And if you have any questions, you're Marion at gardenerscoach.com. I would love to answer any of your questions. Follow my YouTube channel, and I take requests. If you have any topic you think I need to cover, or you'd like me to cover in a YouTube video, I am all ears. So that's Marion at gardenerscoach.com, and I'll see you in the garden. So thanks very much, and have a great rest of your week. Cheers.